Welcome along, everyone, to this very special episode of Irreverent Faith and Current Affairs. I'm joined by Andrew Bridgen, who is the Conservative MP for North West Leicestershire. Mr. Bridgen was involved, I believe it was on Tuesday night, so it was Tuesday the 13th of December, in a debate in the House of Commons on potential vaccine harm, speaking specifically about the COVID-19 vaccines. Before I say anything else, Andrew, I just want to say thank you very much for being with me on the podcast.
You're welcome. Yes, Tuesday night was a memorable evening. It was actually my debate, so it was my adjournment debate, so it was my topic. And as anyone who will have seen it, I would urge people to see it. I think my speech is 20 minutes of the 30 minutes with interventions, and I laid out the case for why we're in the situation I believe we're in. The fact that the scientific evidence does not support further use of the vaccines, the mRNA vaccines. Probably, almost certainly, if you look at the original data from Pfizer and their experimental results when they were testing, it never supported the use of them in the population. So that was Tuesday night. So I called for the government to immediately cessation of all mRNA vaccines, and certainly not to approve their use for children at 6 months, which the MHRA had indicated the week before. I had asked Rishi a question in the chamber about that. I'm very exercised about them being potentially used on children where the children are no benefit from them. And under the Hippocratic Oath, doctors should do no harm. So since there are no benefit whatsoever, actually probably to anybody at the moment, and there is a harm due to the risk of side effects and unexpected harms from the vaccine, they should certainly never be used for children.
Yes, quite.
And I'm pleased that since Tuesday evening, and it was put on YouTube and the Parliament channel at the time, but it's on YouTube within an hour or so. Well, as of this morning, it'll be a lot more now, 2.5 million views. I'm not sure that any adjournment debate has ever got 2.5 million views in a couple of days. And I think it will go a lot higher than that. That shows the level of public interest out there. Yes. I've had over 1,000 emails in from all around the world and the UK, which is the most emails I've ever had on any topic, I think. In a couple of days, they're still piling in. My staff are complaining about the workload of responding to them. And they're 99% positive. Yeah. And I think it's very telling, and perhaps extremely telling, that the mainstream media have not reported on it at all.
Yes, indeed. Well, that was something I wanted to ask you about, because it seems to me that the uptake from the media has been very slight. You'd expect it to be in places like the Telegraph. I've seen a bit on GB News. I haven't heard anything from Talk Radio. I mean, how do you account for the fact that there's clearly such public interest in this, and yet the media are hardly picking it up at all?
Well, the mainstream media are not touching it at all. There's been an article in the Express Online. David Maddox ran a piece, and this morning I did a piece with GB News.
Yes.
And on Sunday, I'm doing a piece with Talk Television, but nothing from the BBC. And they all got the press pack, which I got a press briefing ready for all the media that had every fact that I'd stated in my speech backed up with, I think there was 32 references to scientific papers and journals that I referenced during my 20-minute speech. So it would be very difficult for them to say that what I'd said wasn't supported by the data, in which I guess the only thing they can do is just pretend that the speech didn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is very concerning when you think we live in a free, open democracy where there's huge power in deciding what the news is, isn't there, Jamie?
Yes, indeed. Yes,
and clearly a debate that 2.5 million people wanted to watch on YouTube, and it's going up on, that wasn't what they wanted to watch.
Yeah. And when you consider the mandate of the BBC, which is primarily to educate and inform, And with something like this, you would consider this to be a newsworthy item and that the public needs to be educated about it. And clearly the BBC are uninterested in covering it for whatever reason. I mean, who can say? But let's take this back to the sort of salient points here. So, Andrew, can I ask you, what first brought the issue of potential COVID vaccine harms to your attention? And then can you tell us some of the salient points that you made in that debate for people who haven't watched it?
Well, I have an interest in the topic. Many years ago, my degree at Nottingham University was in biological sciences. I did subsidiary in my first year in biochemistry, and I ended up specialising mostly in genetics and behaviour. And my dissertation in my final year was on viruses and viroids. So I had an interest in the subject. I was uncomfortable about the lockdown policy and the policies that the government have approached with regard to dealing with the so-called COVID pandemic. I was very reluctant to vote for the lockdowns. I didn't vote for the last two lockdowns. I voted against Plan B. I'm sceptical about the mask wearing. I had COVID myself in March 20. Probably the worst thing I've ever had. I've never had flu. I've never had a day off. Never had a whole day off work with an illness. I've had time off when I've broken my leg or something, but not with an illness. It was 6 days. Was very uncomfortable, unusual, getting worse, and then suddenly broke and got better. But I would say it was probably 4 weeks before I felt 100%. It wasn't pleasant, but got over that. I've had 2 AstraZenecas, and then I had Omicron early last December. And Omicron was, on a scale of 1 to 10 compared to the full strength Wuhan, I would say it was about 1.5. So 3 days of headache, a bit of a snotty nose, and a bit achy. Yeah.
So, Andrew, can I just clarify? You said you had the vaccine. Did I hear that correctly? Yes. You had 2 AstraZeneca jabs.
I'm double jabbed with AstraZeneca. Yes.
Right. Okay. All right. So you weren't skeptical about the jab from the beginning, I take it?
No. And I've looked at the way they've been pushed out, and the data that's coming in from harms, the yellow card data, and then when you actually speak to skeptical professionals, but they take you through the scientific papers and the evidence. I mean, you're talking Pfizer's own evidence. 1 in 800 people who have that jab are going to have a severe reaction. They only followed their patient group for 8 weeks after vaccination. So, I mean, some of the side effects we're seeing, pericarditis, myocarditis, pulmonary embolism. I mean, some of those aren't showing for 6 months after, until 6 months after vaccination. So it's likely to be considerably higher than 1 in 800. And the data for America, which is particularly worrying, on Pfizer being tested on under 5-year-olds, and goodness knows who offered their children up for that. There was considerable adverse effects, and 1 in 200 hospitalized and still showing symptoms 90 days after the vaccination, which was the end of their trial. So deeply worrying. Yes. The good news of the debate is that the minister gave a lamentable response as far as I'm concerned. She came out with they are safe and effective. Well, I would say that they're not safe, they're not effective, and they're not necessary. There's almost no benefit, even against Omicron. You'd have to inject 7,300 over 80-year-olds to save 1 life. And given that you're damaging 1 in 800, that's not a good deal. Yeah. And obviously in younger cohort age groups, it's tens and tens and tens of thousands. Yeah. As you get younger to probably hundreds of thousands when you get down to children, and the harms at 1 in 200, it doesn't stack up. It's not science. So yeah, I don't think they're safe. I don't think they're effective. I don't think they're necessary. And I did tell the government that they need to be stopped immediately. And the government has found itself on the wrong side of medical ethics on the mRNA vaccines, the wrong side of the scientific data, and ultimately they'll be on the wrong side of history.
Yeah. Andrew, can you? I mean, that's very, very clear. So the thing that concerns me about this, I mean, as it does with you, is the real human lives that are being really destroyed by these vaccine injuries, and these are really happening. I think for people who are aware that these might be happening, it's actually quite obvious when you look around you at people sportsmen collapsing on football pitches, of celebrities and people in their middle age just inexplicably dying of heart attacks all over the place. It does seem to be quite obvious that it's happening when you're looking for it. I imagine that you have constituents and other people writing to you, telling you about their stories of what's happened to them since they took the vaccine. Could you share some of those that might stick out in your mind?
I've had, since I first raised this issue, probably about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, in a Westminster Hall debate about vaccine harms that was brought by petition. I've had a lot of emails from a lot of people who claim to be vaccine harmed, and people who are perfectly well, and then within weeks of having a vaccine, they're no longer with us, or they've got nervous damage, or they've got heart problems. In fact, I spoke to a constituent today who came around for a meeting, and he had 2 Pfizer vaccines. He's a bit overweight, but he said never had any heart problems. And within a month, he was having a triple heart bypass because he'd suddenly developed heart disease. It's not coincidental. There's a fantastic study in Israel that shows that the incidence of pericarditis and heart attack in men from 18 to 39, this is not a high risk area, was up 25%. The same figures for men in Florida post vaccination was 84%. And sensible countries like Denmark have looked at the harms and the risk benefit of different age groups having the vaccine, and they've come to a sensible decision some weeks ago that no one under 50 should be having a booster or any more vaccines.
Yes.
At the same time as us and the Americans are looking to vaccinate children of 6 months old. This is lunacy. And I can't stand by and see something that's as wrong as that go forward. We don't seem to have many scientists in Parliament, and obviously there's a lot of different issues in Parliament that could take away time by colleagues, but this is a subject I do know something about, and I've got some qualifications in it, and I'm willing to look into it. And it's just not right, Jamie. This is just wrong on every account.
I've got 2 questions, Andrew. Talking from the ethical perspective, what would you say to parents who are thinking about vaccinating their children, particularly, well, for any children of any age, let's say, but particularly parents with very, very young children? So that'd be number one. And then the second part to this question around vaccines for babies is, what is the motivation? Because there'll be many people who are looking at this and scratching their heads and thinking, what is this obsession with vaccinating children, babies of 6 months old? I agree with you. It seems inexplicable when you consider the risk-benefit analysis. So what's driving this?
Well, if I answer them the other way around, what's driving it, I think, is money and greed. And I did say in my speech that I think we've sacrificed enough of our citizens on the lives on the altar of ignorance and unfettered corporate greed. And I'm a free market capitalist. I'm a conservative. I'm an entrepreneur. I was in the food industry for 22 years and run a very successful and profitable business, paid a lot of tax. But I met with Pfizer virtually in November 20 before the rollout came. And Jamie, these people told me then from Pfizer, and they were laughing, that we'll be taking these vaccines every 3 months for the rest of our lives. And basically they were going to make a fortune out of us. And I'd ask your listeners to think about it. Think about the science. We're not all scientists, but if you were going to choose, if the mRNA technology was safe and effective, which it's not, and bear in mind that the mRNA codes for a protein, and if that were to give you protection against a virus, why would you choose the protein, which is the spike, as your test protein for vaccination, when the spike protein is the one that mutates the fastest. So by the time you've actually produced your booster based on the last variant you had spike, it's already mutated. And also, because it's so easy to mutate, merely by having that vaccine, you will force select for the mutation. Why didn't they use part of the protein capsid coat, which doesn't tend to mutate very often, of the virus? Why would you do that? It doesn't make sense. And the only way it makes sense is that every time it mutates, you have to have another vaccine.
Wow. Yeah.
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 Are you with me?
I am with you. Yeah. Yeah, I am with you. So
I can't work out any other motive other than pure money, and you have to have more vaccines.
Right. So
and you have to keep them. Then what Pfizer told me in 2020 is true. They've set a system up where you will have to have a vaccine. There is also some evidence. It's not really confirmed, but it is compelling, and I've seen it, that every time you have a booster, it's actually damaging your immune system. You're more likely after 3 months to catch COVID, but any other virus as well, because you've damaged your immune system. I believe it's damaging your T cells, and that's particularly worrying because they're also the cells that move around your body and detect and destroy early cancers in your body. And there is evidence that every booster, it's cumulative damage to your immune system. Which again, if you were a ruthless businessman and you wanted to create a model where you're creating dependent people, that works.
Yeah.
You do have to have one every 3 months.
Yeah. No, I see what you're saying. So just to clarify, just so we're absolutely clear, you are a Conservative MP. You just had a debate in the House of Commons, the historic chamber, and you're telling me that you met people from Pfizer in 2020 and they said they were going to roll this situation out where we had to have boosters every 3 months. They said they were going to engineer it so that would be the case. You're saying
they didn't say they were going to engineer it. I've only worked that out afterwards. They told me unequivocally, you will be having to take these vaccines every 3 months for the rest of your life.
Okay. And they
didn't tell me how they were going to engineer it.
Yeah, but you have inferred that the technology that they've used is the way that they're putting that business plan into operation. Many people listening to this, Andrew, will be, well, I'm sure many people will be with you and they'll be convinced, but many people will find your story and your speculation so shocking that anyone could behave so despicably and unethically that they almost can't believe it. I mean, do you have anything to say to people like that who just are simply incredulous over?
I know it's not easy to believe, and obviously people don't want to believe it. But as I pointed out in my speech, the directors and staff of Pfizer have a fiduciary duty to produce profit for their shareholders. They do not have no fiduciary duty to give ill people or people in want of a vaccine the best treatment. That's not any of their fiduciary duties.
Right. So it's profit over ethics.
I think it's profits over people.
Yeah, that's the best way.
And when it comes down to children, I mean, no way whatsoever. Not in my name. Yeah.
It is shocking, and I feel upset just listening to it.
And have you seen how many doctors are starting to come out? I also called for the medical professionals who know what's going on, who have kept quiet, and also the scientists. But the trouble is, Big Pharma is funding so much of the research, and they're so powerful. Pfizer made $45 billion, half of their worldwide profits out of the vaccine last year.
Yeah,
that can buy a lot of influence.
Yeah, that is incredible, isn't it? Andrew, let me ask you about the government response. So it was the Parliamentary Undersecretary of State for Health and Social Care, Maria Caulfield. I mean, tell us how did she respond to you? I mean, what did she say?
She got a little angry, and she said that she was a nurse and that she'd seen COVID, and trying to say that, almost infer that I didn't believe that COVID actually existed, which, I mean, I've had it twice. I know it exists.
Yeah.
And she saw people dying of it. Well, I don't doubt that. And that she just trotted out the old mantra that they're safe and effective. But I mean, she didn't challenge my evidence, and the evidence I gave her was evidence I'd got from a presentation by Dr. Asim Malhotra, who's a world-renowned cardiologist, very famous. He presented information in a paper to me that was peer reviewed and other MPs some months ago. It's been out there, and there's been no scientific rebuttal to any of his findings, despite the fact it's been passed all around the world, and and everyone's had a look at it. I mean, if you say go with the science, well, I mean, and I think it's been deeply disturbing over the whole COVID incident that, I mean, science works by challenge. You have an idea, or I have an idea, and then you challenge it. If I can't defend it, then it's not scientifically plausible. It's a bit like, the way politics work. I have an idea of how I want to, and somebody can have another idea, and that's we get to a debate on that. There's been no debate on the efficacy and safety of these vaccines. Everyone who's challenged them has been shut down. Are you going to be shut down, Jamie?
No, I don't think so. I'm doing okay. No, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Andrew, this is a justice issue. This is about people's lives. And the reason I care about this is because I care about the people who it's affecting. And I agree with you. I think if there's a scientific debate to be had, we ought to have it and stop just simply telling people to, these vaccines are safe and effective.
I did also say that the media's silence on concerns over the safety and efficacy of the vaccine was more contagious than the virus itself.
Yes.
And I've had some whistleblowers come to me from inside big media corporation. I can't name them for obvious reasons. And they've said to me that they are getting bombarded by people who claim that they're vaccine harmed, and that they don't believe they're getting the treatment they should be from the NHS. These executives are convinced that this is going to be the biggest medical scandal in history. But they also told me if they were to mention it in their office, they feel that they'd get sacked.
Yeah.
I mean, for that to happen in the UK at any time is absolutely shocking.
Yeah, I agree. There has been a sense of fear that has been with us, has been present for the last 2.5 years over this COVID thing, because the way the narrative has been rolled out is you accept this and you do what we say, or else you are endangering people's lives. And that has completely shut down the debate, and it's spread fear. And now we have this situation where
fear and compliance, and the people, they're being treated like sheep. And I don't like them. I was in favour as a behavioural scientist of the nudge department, putting on tax demands instead of saying you will get fined £200 if you don't return this by this date, saying 98% of people return this on time and don't get fined, which is a nicer message to nudge people along. But I mean, I think during COVID, the nudge department, I said this in the chamber last December, has become the shove department, and I don't like them shoving my people around or anybody. It's not the way to go on. Things have not been right, Jamie. A lot of things have not been right to me in the last 3 years. Yeah.
This is a point that the author Laura Dodsworth has made in her book A State of Fear, and she the principle that she brings out, which I think is quite right, is that this is ultimately undemocratic to treat people in this way. You're not properly informing them. You make the decision for them, and then you essentially manipulate them on a subconscious level into conformity.
The government were making new COVID rules, bringing them in, and then we were voting on them 3 days after they'd already been brought in. I mean, how does that work? Instead of having an emergency debate, I mean, I said in the Plan B debate last December, where we had 101 of us rebelled against the masks, I voted against the mandates to sack the NHS workers who wouldn't take the vaccines. I voted against all of the Plan B stuff, quite honestly, and that was absolutely right. I think my closing remark in that debate was that the only pandemic we've really been suffering is a pandemic of fear, and it's got to stop.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I quite agree. Let me ask you this: when is the dam going to break? You know journalists who know about this. I'm sure that other MPs must receive emails from their constituents. I'm sure lots of doctors clearly know what's going on. Lots of them do anyway. When is the dam going to burst? When is the truth going to come out?
As soon as possible, because I think we're losing lives. Everyone who's being boosted and vaccinated is in danger. I don't think many people are having the boosters now, quite honestly. I think the people know. A lot of people do know. I'm hoping that following my appeal for the scientists who know, and the doctors and the nurses and those in the media, and there are a lot of people in the media who know who aren't saying anything. I mean, cowardice is contagious as well, but so's courage, and I hope that they'll take some strength from my remarks this week, and now's the time to come forward. We've only got 2 days of Parliament left, Monday, Tuesday, and then obviously it's not so easy to exert political pressure once we're in recess till the 9th of January. It would be nice if we could put a lot of pressure on the government before Christmas, but of course Christmas and everyone drifts away again, and this is a huge issue. This is about people's lives.
Do you know, and I obviously you can reveal as much as you like to me, whatever you're comfortable with, but do you know other MPs who are aware of the issue here who are not speaking out?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's leave it at that. I mean, that's a pretty clear answer.
And I know them on both sides of the chamber. But they're scared.
And that's what it is, isn't it? Across the board with Parliament, with journalists, with doctors, and so on. It can be the only motive, can't it? I can't think of another motive. It's just that people are afraid if they speak out.
They're intimidated and afraid. Yes. Yes.
But I suppose what you're saying is that if enough people like you come out and tell the truth and are courageous, then eventually it will actually get easier, won't it? Because in many ways, it's actually the hardest moment at this precise time, because so few people are actually speaking out. It means that people like you are fairly lonely voices, doesn't it? And that was another thing I was going to ask is that are you concerned for your own standing in the party and elsewhere?
I've been onto this for over almost a year now, about a year now. There's a lot of, you might notice that I've had a lot of bad publicity in the last 12 months, which I've never had before. I'm not convinced I'll be in Parliament in a few months' time. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
So you think you won't be? Yeah,
I might well not be.
What do you mean? Prior to the general election, you won't be?
Yes.
Right. Okay. And I mean, can you elaborate as to why you think that might be?
I can't. I can't.
Okay.
I can't.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of strange things been going on.
Yeah.
A lot of very, very unhelpful and I will say untrue articles in the mainstream media who will quite happily write appalling stories about me, especially if I may be in a legal process which I can't respond on them, but won't report on a debate of huge importance in the chamber of the House of Commons. Interesting, that, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
On some occasions, I can be very interesting to them, but talking about COVID harms, I'm not interesting at all. Yeah.
Andrew, before I ask you sort of final question, I just want to absolutely nail this statistical question, because I don't know if we made it absolutely crystal clear, but a key line of argument that you're making is that in this country, for example, in the yellow card reporting system, we have received something like 500,000 yellow cards.
A lot more than 1 in 800 of the people who will have had a vaccine. And
so just to explain to people what that means, that people, let's say a yellow card report is filled in after somebody has encounters a suspected vaccine injury. Now, the other really important statistical point here is that I think the estimation is that the yellow card reporting system catches about something like 10% of the
maybe less than 10%, but if we're generous, 10%. So it could be not 500,000, it could be 5 million people who've been damaged.
And those damages are potential damages. So it could be a coincidence, it could be mild, but it could be extremely severe, and it could be death. So can you just make it totally clear to our listeners, like that's actually extremely concerning, isn't it? And it's, for example, there are far more of these yellow card reports associated with the COVID-19 vaccines than with other conventional vaccines. Well,
2 stats for you. Worldwide, there's been more reports of harm. Bear in mind, we know they're underreported in 18 months around mRNA vaccines, all of them, than there has been about conventional vaccines worldwide for the last 50 years, to put it in context. Considerably more in the last 18 months, just about the mRNA. On the yellow card system, 500,000, that's more than all the yellow card systems run in UK alone for the last 40 years. So more on the mRNA vaccine than all the previous yellow card systems.
Right.
And all drugs.
Yeah. And what would normally happen?
What would happen? No, well, I think also that this is why we're still on emergency authorization. What happens is once a drug is approved, then it's monitored. And more than a certain number of adverse effects, in 1976, the swine flu vaccine was withdrawn for suspected of causing Guillain-Barré syndrome in 1 in 100,000 recipients of the vaccine.
Right.
The rotavirus vaccine was withdrawn in 1999 for causing a bowel obstruction in 1 in 10,000 children who took that vaccine. Well, I mean, we're talking magnitudes worse with mRNA, and no one's stopping it.
Yep.
And from all the evidence you've got, Omicron's a cold. You've got to vaccinate 112 people to stop one infection. You'd have to vaccinate 7,300 over 80s to save one life. Hundreds and hundreds and thousands, probably hundreds and hundreds of thousands of children to save potentially one life. But your harms would have been enormous. But 1 in 200.
Yeah,
it's not science. Yeah, it's not ethical.
Yeah.
It's wrong.
Yeah, I agree, Andrew, and it does also sort of raise the question with someone like Maria Caulfield, isn't it? I'm
sure it's a lovely lady and a nurse.
Yeah, I'm sure she is. But the question I would want to ask her is, how many more yellow card reports would you need to consider this to be a problem? I mean, it just seems to be so clearly.
Well, quite worrying, Jamie. I had breakfast with a former minister who'd had that position, who will have to remain nameless. But they told me they'd asked for a review after I'd pressurised them into whether they should be using them on children at all. And they spoke to their civil servants, and I was told the answer that came back is, when they asked for a review into whether we should be using them on children, what answer are you looking for, Minister?
Right.
Which is totally unacceptable. Looking for the right answer. Yeah,
indeed. I mean, it is quite shocking to hear. Andrew, I can see that you're generating a huge amount of interest, and I do really appreciate your time. I've just got one question really to finish off with, and you can take this however you want. So this podcast, our subject matter is faith in current affairs, and I know you're in a different sphere. You're in a different world, but what would your message be for the church? I mean, particularly the established church, the Church of England, but for the Christian church and people of goodwill more widely. What would your message be? What would you want to say?
Well, the church has to stand up for what's right, and we can all see what's right here. And if we don't stand up together on this one, quite honestly, there is no point. This is about, now it's got down to our children. It wasn't right before, and lots of us have not spoken out when I probably should have done much earlier, probably a year ago, and I've sucked it up. But the evidence is now overwhelming, and I'm not convinced that we're playing with. These are not good actors. These are not good actors. We're talking about humanity. We're talking about our children. And the revelations that you have to think about, the things that have happened. I mean, this is changing my view of the world, and that's not a world I want to live in. Certainly not without taking action.
Yeah.
So we must all join together.
Yes. Andrew Bridgen, MP. Thank you so much for coming on, but more generally for your courage and your integrity over this issue. I do believe that it's interventions like this that are really going to make the difference, and that the dam will burst initially. And I hope that this is a beginning of that in this country, in the public sphere. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay. Goodbye
Yes.
now.
Bye-bye.
God bless.